The Dardeen family murders. When investigators walked into the Dardeen family's trailer, they entered a nightmare. A mother and child were slaughtered, a baby was born during the attack, and the baby was killed instantly. Hours later, the father's body turned up far from home, shot and mutilated. The crime was so grotesque that even hardened detectives believed evil itself had passed through Ina, Illinois that night. A 29-year-old man named Russell Dardeen, his 30-year-old wife Ruby, and their 3-year-old son Peter lived a modest life in a small trailer in Jefferson County. Ruby was heavily pregnant with the couple's second child. On November 18, 1987, their lives were erased in a matter of hours. Neighbors had alerted police when Russell didn't show up for work. After they arrived, the horror began inside the trailer. Ruby and Peter were beaten to death with a child-sized baseball bat, a gift to young Peter. During the attack, Ruby went into labor. The newborn baby girl was delivered alive but killed moments later. 3 lives ended in that small space, and then came the father's fate. Russell's body was found miles away in a field near railroad tracks. He had been shot 3 times, and his genitals were mutilated. His red Plymouth was discovered near a police station with blood inside. It was as if the crime had been staged in 2 acts, one inside the family home and one outside in the fields. The autopsy and investigative consensus indicate that Russell was killed after his wife and children. The brutality raised more questions than it answered. There was no forced entry at the trailer. Nothing of value was stolen. Investigators concluded the family must have either known or trusted the killer. Robbery, jealousy, and even drug rumors were considered, but all collapsed under a lack of evidence. And then came the leads. Police examined co-workers and acquaintances, including a man who had previously argued with Russell. He was questioned, then cleared. They studied Russell's finances and personal life, but found nothing to explain such violence. Time of death estimates showed Russell had likely been killed first, separated from the others by as much as a day, and then came the confession that further complicated the case. Years later, convicted serial killer Tommy Lynn Sells claimed responsibility. He described the murders in disturbing detail. Some of what he said aligned with known facts, such as the brutality inside the trailer. But much of his story didn't fit. He placed himself in the wrong sequence of events, contradicting evidence. Investigators couldn't prove he was lying, but they couldn't prove he was telling the truth either. Tommy Lynn Sells was executed by lethal injection on April 3, 2014, at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville, which leaves the final truth still out of reach. The Dardeen family murders remain officially unsolved. A baseball bat, a red car, bodies left in separate places, a confession that doesn't fit, and no answers. Nearly 4 decades later, investigators still describe it as one of the bleakest mysteries in American history, as every lead ends in silence. The Setagaya family murders. On the night of December 30, 2000, a killer broke into a quiet Tokyo home. By morning, 4 people were dead, a mother, a father, and their 2 young children. But what came after the murders is what still chills investigators today. Instead of fleeing, the killer stayed. He ate their food. He used their computer. He changed into fresh clothes from his bag and left the dirty ones behind. He even napped in their living room before vanishing without a trace. The victims were the Miyazawa family, 44-year-old Mikio, his 41-year-old wife Yasuko, and their children Nina, 8 years old, and Rei, 6 years old. They lived in a suburban house in Setagaya Ward, a large residential district in Tokyo, Japan. Their house shared a wall with a public park. That connection to the outside world may have been what drew the killer in. Investigators believe he climbed in through a second-floor bathroom window, striking suddenly and without mercy. The killings themselves were as brutal as the behavior that followed. Mikio, likely after confronting the intruder downstairs, was stabbed repeatedly with a sashimi knife, which snapped inside his head during the attack. Yasuko and Naina were trapped upstairs and attacked with a santoku blade that the killer was forced to take from the kitchen to finish the murders. The last victim was Rei, who was strangled in his bedroom as he slept. And yet, after destroying an entire family, the killer didn't leave. Inside the house, he moved as if he belonged there. He raided the refrigerator, eating ice cream, melon, and drinking barley tea. He sat at the family's computer, browsing websites and attempting to open files. He used their first aid kit to treat his own wounds. Blood from those injuries stained the walls and floors. He even left waste unflushed in the bathroom. Investigators estimate he stayed several hours, possibly until morning, before walking calmly out of the house. And what he left behind was staggering. Fingerprints covered walls, doors, and objects throughout the home. His DNA was in blood traces across multiple rooms. Shoe prints matched those of Schlesinger sneakers, sold exclusively in South Korea, with only 4,800 pairs manufactured. He abandoned his clothing. They were a mix of items traced to brands sold in Japan, South Korea, and the US. Soil on his clothes matched a type found near an American military base. Every detail should have led to him, but no database has ever matched his DNA. His fingerprints remain unidentified. More than 1,000 fingerprints were collected, but none matched the databases. The shoes, the clothes, the soil, all ended in dead ends. The evidence feels almost deliberate, like a breadcrumb trail designed to confuse. Who was he? A drifter, or someone staging a performance? Some investigators believe he was a transient, maybe someone living rough in the park who slipped in by chance. Others insist it was the opposite. A calculated intruder who staged chaos and left obvious clues on purpose, daring investigators to solve the puzzle. DNA suggested a man of East Asian ancestry, possibly with a maternal lineage linked to Southern Europe. However, even global searches yielded no results. And then comes the question no one can answer. Why this family? The Miyazawas had no enemies, no ties to organized crime, no secrets. They lived in a house bordering a public park, accessible to strangers, and that may have been their only vulnerability. But why the killer stayed, why he lingered, and why he acted as he belonged in their home remains a mystery. More than 2 decades later, the case is still unsolved. Thousands of interviews have been conducted. The fingerprints and DNA remain unmatched. Despite one of the most extensive investigations in Japanese history, the killer walked out of the Miyazawa home that night and disappeared, leaving behind a family destroyed, a house full of evidence, and a mystery that still feels like it was designed never to be solved. The Keddie Cabin 28 Murders. Cabin 28 in the tiny town of Keddie, Plumas County, Northern California, became the scene of one of America's most haunting unsolved massacres. A mother, her son, and his friend were butchered. A daughter was abducted, and evidence pointing to suspects who were never charged. From the beginning, the crime scene suggested something personal, something organized. The bodies were bound with medical tape and electrical cords. Multiple weapons had been used, and the attacks happened in a single cramped room. And yet, the daughter, 12-year-old Tina, was taken into the night, her remains only surfacing years later. The crime scene spoke of horror and calculation. On the night of April 11, 1981, 36-year-old mother Glenna Sue Sharp, her 15-year-old son John, and his 17-year-old friend Dana Wingate suffered a frenzy of violence. Glenna Sue was gagged with a bandana and her own underwear, stabbed in the chest, and her throat was cut. John was also stabbed and his throat slashed. Dana had head trauma consistent with blunt force and evidence of manual strangulation. At least 2 knives, a hammer, and even the butt of a Daisy 880 BB gun were used. The murders took place in the living room while 3 boys slept unharmed in a nearby bedroom. Then came the missing child. Tina's absence deepened the nightmare. She had been in the cabin during the attack but was abducted from the scene. For 3 years, her fate was unknown, until a skull and fragments of bone were discovered in the woods 50 miles away. Investigators believe she may have been abducted as part of the attack, either to silence her as a witness or because she was the focus all along. The leads have haunted this case for decades. In 2016, a hammer was recovered from a pond near Keddie. It matched the description of one that a local neighbor, Marty Smart, had reported missing. In 2018, DNA recovered from the medical tape binding the victims was linked to a known living suspect, though authorities have never named them publicly. Witnesses reported a green van near Cabin 28 that night. Composites were drawn from the testimony of young Justin, one of the surviving children, although his accounts changed over time. Then came the suspects and the confessions. Marty Smart himself allegedly confessed to a counselor that he killed Sue and Tina, though not the boys. A letter he wrote to his wife seemed to hint at guilt. "I've paid the price of your love, and now I've bought it with 4 people's lives." Yet he was never arrested. Some investigators believe that 2 or more people may have been involved in the crime or its cover-up, and yet the case still refuses to close. The original crime scene was compromised. Neighbors walked through the cabin before it was secured. Evidence was contaminated, and some items were lost forever. Even with DNA, recovered weapons, and confessions, no charges have ever been brought. For the Sharp family, justice has remained elusive for more than 40 years. A mother, Son and friend were slaughtered in one room. A daughter was abducted and left in the woods. Suspects identified, leads uncovered, but no resolution has been reached. Cabin 28 was demolished in 2004, but the mystery lingers, an intimate, organized slaughter that still defies answers. This mystery may be over, but the next one will keep you up at night. Watch now.